Thank you for taking your time, Robert.
It's my pleasure.
Let's see where this interview is going to go, because we can go in so many directions.
Yes, of course.
I'm sitting here with tons of books on this table, all of them written by you. You have 25 books written?
At least, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
About journals, etc. And so you've been touching upon a wide range of topics. Could you mention just quickly a little bit about your background and who you are and what you've been diving into in your life?
Yes, well, originally, I'm from England. I was born in the town of Reading, west of London, about 1 hour west of London. And then I studied mathematics at university in the south of England, University of Sussex, which is near the town of Brighton, which is a coastal town, a resort town, very nice place. And then I was teaching mathematics after I graduated. I was teaching mathematics at what is now called Brighton University. At that time it was called Brighton Polytechnic. And during that time I began my PhD work on the history of the zodiac. And it was really a matter of interest to me to find out when was who and how the first scientific definition of the zodiac came about.
And this zodiac is the Western zodiac, or is it all because we've been talking before, and it sounds to me like you know quite a lot about the Indian zodiacs, and Chinese, and you're all over the place. So your research was not just on the Western zodiac, right?
No, and I've traced in this. This is the book of my PhD thesis, just called History of the Zodiac, and I was very fortunate. I was able to submit my thesis at the Polish Academy of Sciences in Warsaw, the Institute for History of Astronomy there, and I was able to do that without having to have residential requirements, which is what usually is the case at most universities when you do a PhD. So that was very fortunate, and I completed this in the year 2004, and then in early 2005 I received my PhD thesis. And
back in those days, did you study any other things,
Oh, yes. I started this work in 1974. That was when I began my research on the history of the zodiac. So it was a 30-year-long project. When it was like a kind of archaeological investigation. And what most people interested in astrology in the West don't realize is that there was a whole form of astrology that was developed by the Babylonians, and where they used a completely different zodiac from what is used by astrologers in the West at the present time.
And so the Babylonians are who, and how long time ago did they exist?
Well, of course, the Babylonian culture existed for a very long time, but they were the first culture really to practice making exact observations of the stars and the planets. And so I won't go into...
When were they, how long time ago did they do that?
Well, we find through and they kept records, what are called cuneiform texts. They had a special way of imprinting a stylus into clay tablets, and then in the 19th century, tens of thousands of these clay tablets were found, and then gradually began the work of deciphering them. And it was then, so in 1893, that one of the first people working on this, Joseph Epping, discovered that the Babylonians had a different zodiac from what we know from Greek astronomy. So the Babylonians had their zodiac, which was the original form of the zodiac, we could say the primal zodiac, in its scientific definition, from about 500 years before Christ, and then through Greek astronomers who knew about the existence of the zodiac, they came up with their own definition, which is what superseded in the West the Babylonian zodiac. So it was only at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, that knowledge of the Babylonian zodiac began to come into the West.
And so that's the Sumerian clay tablets, or?
The Sumerian was the preceding culture to the Babylonian.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so would you say that what is called Jyotish astrology from India and Chinese astrology from India, that is younger science than the Babylonians, or did it exist before that or after, or?
Well, Chinese star wisdom is very, very ancient and has a completely different background. I don't go into this in my thesis. Okay. It's completely different images of the constellations than what we know in astronomy. And so I've left that out of account. That would have just been too complicated. So I restricted my attention to the original Babylonian definition of the zodiac and how this became transmitted to Egypt, to Greece, to Rome, and all the way to India. In India, they had their own very ancient division of the starry heavens into what they call lunar mansions, or the Sanskrit word nakshatras. And then when the zodiac became transmitted from Alexandria to India round about the 2nd century after Christ, then the system of nakshatras became incorporated into the zodiac. So that's what we find in the Hindu astrology or Vedic astrology. But the Babylonian was the original.
Okay. And so just to make it clear for people who are listening, we have astronomy and then we have astrology. Could you explain a little bit about the difference between the two?
Yes. Well, astronomy, as the name indicates, is originally about the naming of the stars and then describing the physical structure of the universe around us, everything to do with the physical location of stars and relationship to the Earth, astronomical systems which describe the movements of the planets. And astrology is about we could say, the more subtle connection of the human being with the starry heavens. Mm-hmm. More subtle, that is, in terms of possible influences. Mm-hmm. Of course, astronomers tend to completely reject this idea of there being influences from the starry heavens. Mm-hmm. But I think if we just consider the influence of the sun is obviously overwhelming for the whole of nature. Yeah. So clearly we can speak of an influence of the sun.
Yeah. Which is a star?
The sun is a star.
So why would other stars not have tremendous effect on us as well?
Exactly.
And the moon is affecting us.
The moon, yes, and the phases of the moon work on the tides. It's clear that there are influences, and this was one of the themes that really interested me to explore, and which I did in I wrote 2 volumes, Hermetic Astrology, in which I undertook a scientific investigation regarding the question of the influences of the starry heavens. And it's in these 2 volumes that I...
what does Hermetic mean?
Yes, this Hermetic comes from the Egyptian tradition, which goes back to one of the great teachers of ancient Egypt, Hermes, who with him is associated the expression "as above, so below," which is, say, the entire principle of astrology. That there, just as there are the stars above, that there are corresponding effects here on the earth below.
So when we say the universe is truly within, it's actually literally, it is really within.
Exactly, yeah. That there are correspondences within the human being to what we can observe around us in the starry heavens. And so that was what I went into in these 2 volumes. And what I found, I developed a method of research. I found that the principles of astrology apply if you take the original Babylonian zodiac, what is called the sidereal zodiac. Originally it was just called the zodiac because there wasn't any other zodiac. It was just the zodiac in antiquity. And then when, through Greek astronomy, an alternative definition of the zodiac was introduced, what is now used by the majority of astrologers in the West and is based on the cycle of the year, is no longer relating to the starry heavens.
Okay, so the difference between a regular zodiac and a sidereal zodiac, what is that?
Yes, in present-day astrology, the majority of astrologers use what is called the Tropical Zodiac, which is defined in relation to the cycle of the seasons. So we have the cycle of the sun. The 4 most important points in the cycle of the year are the vernal equinox, the summer solstice, the autumn equinox or fall equinox, and the winter solstice. And those define the 4 seasons of the year. Vernal equinox, beginning of spring; summer solstice, the beginning of summer; the autumn equinox, the beginning of autumn or the fall; and the winter solstice, the beginning of winter. So that is related to the cycle of the year. And it is, as far as I'm concerned, a historical accident that this working with the cycle of the year became substituted in place of the starry heavens.
So sidereal zodiac means where you really start connecting with the stars.
Exactly. Sidereal means related to the stars.
So basically, just to make it clear, there is a form of astrology where it's like on paper and it follows the seasons and that's all great, but they forget to look up in the sky and actually look where the planets are in the sky and where the stars are. Yes. So it's becoming some kind of theoretical science, I would say, where the sidereal is actual astronomy, that where you actually go and look and see where is the sun according to the sky, and you make your conclusions from that.
Yes.
Okay, so I would say the sidereal is describing more the world as it is, like reality as it is, instead of a theoretical cycle that is trying to describe the whole thing all the time.
Exactly. So very much part of my practice is stargazing, looking at the stars, and so right now you can see, so today we have the 22nd of February and 2019, and if you look up at the starry heavens before sunrise, you can see Venus and Saturn in the constellation of Sagittarius, and above them you can see Jupiter in the constellation of Scorpio. So
could I, if let's say I watch this interview in 6 months, 1 year from now, what software could I go and visit to go in and check what you're going to say now?
Any app will give you this background, the image. Yes,
yeah, okay.
Star Walk or any astronomical app.
Okay, good. So let's continue. Where is the planets? Where's the stars right now?
Yeah. So right now, as I just mentioned, you can see Jupiter in the constellation of Scorpio, and you can see Venus and Saturn in the constellation of Sagittarius. Now, as an astronomer, it is very strange then to hear an astrologer say that actually Jupiter right now is in the constellation of Sagittarius and Venus and Saturn are in the constellation of Capricorn, or they would say in the sign of Capricorn. Yeah. And this, as far as I'm concerned, is a disconnect from the reality of the starry heavens.
Yes.
If you think of as above, so below. Yeah.
So we gotta check out there and see what's going on. So basically, we spoke before about this, and you blew my mind. And I'll be completely honest and say that when you first told me, I didn't believe it. And I was like, oh my God, I mean, there's no way we cannot know where these planets are and the stars are. But then you went outside with me, and you used your GPS software that shows exactly where the sun is. It was close to my birthday at that time.
Yes.
And I could see the sun was not where I was being told it's supposed to be, because I thought I was a Scorpio. And I realized I was a Libra, because it's in Libra. And so that blew my mind. And so basically, if you go to an astrologer right now, they will tell you certain things that are completely out of alignment with the reality in the heavens.
Exactly. Yeah. So this, I would say there are many wonderful astrologers who are very gifted and intuitive, and that in spite of this disconnect, they are able to say some very accurate things.
Yes.
But what I would say is that they could be so much more informed and precise if they were to step into the reality of the starry heavens.
Yes.
Now, another very interesting point is that the word astrology means the science of the stars.
Yes.
And so the stars have a natural influence, like our sun. So, for example, in terms of what you were just saying, that at your birth the sun was in the sign of Libra, not in Scorpio, right? And you could see that from the app that I showed you around this was the day after your birthday, that this is what is meant when we say the sun is in, let's say, is in Libra. The sun is then together with those stars that form that configuration that we call Libra. So the sun is in Libra. The sun is the sun is a fixed star, and it's relating to the other fixed stars. And in the cycle of the year, the sun passes through these 12 configurations of stars.
Okay, so how did this happen? How did it happen that we are so far off? Like, how did that happen? Can we dive back in the history of the confusion?
The sun right now is in Aquarius, but it's several degrees into Aquarius. So today, right now, the sun is at 9 degrees of Aquarius, and astrologers would say that the sun is now in Pisces, right? So this happened around the time, and this is very interesting to consider. This happened at the time of the Greek astronomer Claudius Ptolemy, who was an astronomer who lived in Alexandria, Egypt, but he was interested also in astrology, but more from an academic point of view. In his book, Tetrabiblos, about astrology, he doesn't give any horoscopes there, but he does talk about the stars. And so it's clear in his description, when he's relating to the signs of the zodiac, he actually is describing the stars as one would see them in the heavens. So in other words, he's relating to the sidereal zodiac. But it just so happened at the time when he was writing that book, which was 150 years after Christ, that at that time the vernal point was at 1 degree of Aries. And so he wrote in the book, he said that the vernal point indicates the start of the sign of Aries, which is true, well, let's say there's just a 1 degree discrepancy. And so when his book became translated into Arabic, the Arabic astrologers didn't know any better, and by that time the vernal point had moved somewhat, so they just took...
What is the vernal point?
The vernal point is the position of the sun on the day of the vernal equinox, when the sun is... So in the northern hemisphere, the sun is crossing from south to north of the ecliptic, the equator, and when at the autumnal equinox, then it's moving back down, talking from the standpoint of the northern hemisphere, from the north to south. And equinox means equal nights. In other words, the day and night are each 12 hours long.
Yeah. And so the vernal point is changing. What is it exactly that makes it change?
Right. So there are 3 movements we have to consider. So we're all familiar with the fact of the cycle of the day. We see the sun rising in the east at sunrise and setting in the west at sunset. And we have this 24-hour cycle of the day. So that is actually determined by the rotation of the Earth on its axis as it goes around the sun. So it takes 24 hours. Okay? Then we have the cycle of the sun, the relationship between the Earth and the sun in the cycle of the year, because it takes the Earth 1 year to make one rotation around the sun. So from the Earth looking at the sun, that is how we see this changing relationship with the background of the zodiacal constellations in the cycle of the year.
Yeah. Okay. So that's the second movement?
That's the second, but there is a third movement because the Earth, as it is moving around the Sun, is also making a very slight adjustment each year, very slight adjustment in terms of its relationship with this background of the starry heavens. And this adjustment only becomes visible over an extended period of time. It's a movement of 1 degree in 72 years, and that is what is called the precession of the equinoxes.
Okay.
So right now, since the time of Ptolemy, as I mentioned, at that time the vernal point was at 1 degree of Aries. Now the vernal point is at 5 degrees of Pisces. Mm-hmm. So we have a shift back. That's why that we have the term precession. It's a backward shift.
Okay. So is that what some people are calling the wobble? The wobble
Yes.
of the Earth? So basically there's this, you can draw a line in the center of the Earth, and then that actually is rotating slowly and have this wobble, which is taking 72 years to just move 1 degree.
Exactly.
Okay, so this wobble is actually making things different every 72 years, or actually all the time, but it's changing. And so that wobble is moving through the zodiac, right?
Yes, it shows up in 2 different ways. On the one hand, the zodiacal background of the vernal point is changing by 1 degree every 72 years. So as I mentioned, from the time of, let's say from the time of Christ, when the zodiacal background on the day of the vernal equinox was in Aries, now it is it was at that time near the beginning of Aries, and now it's near the beginning of Pisces.
Yeah.
But we also observe this wobble effect in terms of the Earth's axis, the direction it's pointing. So right now, if we take through the North Pole and continue that axis of the Earth up to the starry heavens, we come very close to the star Polaris, which we call the pole star. Now, if we go back to ancient Egypt, let's say we go back 2,000 years before Christ, then that was not pointing to the pole star, it was pointing to a star in the constellation of Draco, the dragon, the star Thuban. So at that time, Thuban was the pole star. Now, in about 7,000 years' time, a little over 7,000 years' time, the pole star will be Deneb, which is the tail of the swan or the head of the Northern Cross, depending on how you look at that constellation. And around about 12,000 years' time, the pole star will be the star Vega. So we see this also in this shift, this changing of the pole star. So
I've seen these video recordings where night sky shootings, where it's like this pole star is in the center, and you see basically the whole universe, all the stars moving around in a circle because the Earth is rotating so fast. What we don't see in these videos is if you could spin this really fast, we would see that axis actually starting moving and pointing in a different direction. Yeah. So
over a long period of
over
time.
long periods of time. Yeah. Okay.
And so this, you can work it out if it's shifting at the rate of 1 degree in 72 years, which is interestingly approximately the length of a human life, or nowadays people are living longer, but
well, actually, our lifespan is shortening right now these days.
yeah, well, Anyway,
But that's about a lifetime, yes.
yes. So 1 degree in 72 years, which is interesting. And then also another interesting correspondence is that the average number of heartbeats in a minute is 72.
Interesting.
See? Yeah. So there is a correspondence, see, with the heavens. Now, if you say, well, how long does it take for the vernal point to shift through one sign of the zodiac? So right now, we're at 5 degrees of Pisces. We can ask the question, how long will it take for the vernal point to shift back into Aquarius? Because it's going backwards. It will go from Pisces into Aquarius. That's why it's called precession, which is this retrograde movement. Backwards.
Yeah.
So 1 degree in 72 years. So for the remaining 5 degrees of Pisces, that's going to take another 360 years, right?
Okay.
And in fact, I've worked this out precisely because my PhD thesis is on the actual exact definition of the zodiac. Then one can see that the vernal point will enter Aquarius. That means it will go from 0 degrees Pisces to, let's say, 30 degrees of Aquarius in the year 2375. You can work this out exactly. That will be the start of the age of Aquarius.
Okay.
And so then for the precession through Aquarius, this 30 degree sign, 30 times 72 is 2,160 years.
For one
One,
constellation.
yes, so that's called one, that would be a zodiacal age. So we're still in the age of Pisces, we're moving towards the age of Aquarius, then we'll come into the age of Capricorn. We go back to the time of Christ, we were in the age of Aries, and before that, with the Egyptians, the Babylonians, we were in the age of Taurus, and so on. So now this is then very interesting to consider as having to do with evolution, the evolution of culture. And that is a theme that I have explored in great detail. And what I've been able to see is that there are always a sequence of 7 cultures. So 7 times 2,160 is 15,120 years. So that is a period of 7, this is a great age.
So 7 cultures within one constellation.
No, that will be 7 constellations. 7.
One culture, 7 constellations? I'm confused.
One culture lasts for a zodiacal age.
Oh, okay.
A zodiacal age lasts for 2,160 years.
Okay.
So 7 times that is 15,120 years.
Yeah.
And so what I found is that you can actually look at you can go back into earlier periods of time. So if we read Plato, for example, we find that there used to be a great continent called Atlantis in the region where there is now the Atlantic Ocean. And on that continent there were 7 cultures, 7 different cultures corresponding to the 7 zodiacal ages during which this, let's call it Atlantean civilization flourished. Now we are in a period, Atlantis was destroyed by the Great Flood. That is also described in the Bible with Noah's Ark, this great flood, and then began a new cycle of culture. So here we get into a very interesting background to the unfolding of evolution, the unfolding of history. So if we look at this, we can go back to the time of the flood was towards the end of the preceding age of Leo. And then round about the beginning of the age of Cancer, when the vernal point was in Cancer, which was about 8,000 years before Christ, there began this cycle of 7 zodiacal ages. So it began with Cancer and then went through Gemini, Taurus, Aries. We're now in the age of Pisces, that is the 5th of this cycle of 7. Then we come to Aquarius, which is the 6th, and then we come to Capricorn, which will be the 7th. And then there will be, after that, a whole new cycle that will begin.
Okay. Has this anything to do with what is called the root races?
Exactly, yeah. That's what Helena Blavatsky called the root races. There are different, there's the Atlantean, and before that even, we can go back, we could date the extension of Atlantis, which began in the preceding age of Aquarius, actually, and lasted until the age of Leo. There are 7 cultures within that period of 15,120 years. And then prior to that, there was Lemuria.
So Lemuria was before Atlantis?
Yeah. And that was that was a great continent located in the region where there is the Indian Ocean. So, for example, the Aborigines of Australia and the Bushmen of Africa, they are descendants from the Lemurian time. We could say there was an exodus from Lemuria to Australia, to Africa, and so the Aborigines of Australia are thought to be the longest surviving continuous human culture on the planet. Right. And they're really descendants, we could say, from ancient Lemuria. In the same way, before the great continent of Atlantis was destroyed, there were exodus to North America. For example, the Native American Indians are descendants from Atlantis.
Okay.
Yeah. And then when we read about Noah's Ark, there's obviously an exodus. Noah was somebody who was very spiritually enlightened, knew something terrible was coming, and left Atlantis, constructed this ark, and took his disciples with him. And there are different ideas about where he went, but what I'm inclined to agree with is that he went to the region of what is now called the Gobi Desert, northern China, south of Mongolia, that region, which is now a desert region, but which at that time was actually flourishing, and that he had a community there, and he had in particular 7 disciples who he had taken with him from Atlantis, who then came down into northern India, and they are the ones who are called the 7 holy rishis, who were the founders of the ancient Indian culture, which was the first culture after the destruction of Atlantis, containing this incredible wisdom that we find in the Vedas and ancient Hindu texts. So that was the first great culture in India, And in the Hindu tradition, they speak of the great teacher of the seven holy rishis they call the Manu. So the Manu is simply their name for the one who is referred to in the Bible as Noah. We find correspondence between all these different traditions. And then later on, when the vernal point left Cancer, so that was the flourishing of the ancient Indian culture on the subcontinent of India, then there began a new culture when the vernal point entered Gemini, and that was the culture founded by the great teacher Zarathustra.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And that was the ancient Persian civilization. It had a very different orientation to the ancient Indian, and we see this rise and fall of different civilizations, different cultures, is the progress of evolution. In each culture, something new is developed.
And are they? Is also some of the old knowledge is forgotten at the same time, or?
Well, not really forgotten, because there is always, as it were, a kind of repository of ancient knowledge which can be recovered. And there are people who are very gifted in this respect, and through a combination of methods are able to recover the ancient knowledge. So
is that the Akashic records?
That is one of the ways, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So what is interesting with Zarathustra is that he taught agriculture, and he taught the importance of human beings cultivating the earth, working together with Mother Earth, whereas in ancient India that wasn't really very much in their consciousness. It was more about attaining enlightenment. So this was a necessary step with Zarathustra and the ancient Persian civilization, that we start to become acquainted with the earth. And this was taken a stage further when the vernal point entered Taurus. So we then had a new zodiacal age, and there we have the thriving of the Egyptian and the Babylonian, well, Sumerian, Babylonian cultures, and the beginning of these building of these monumental structures like the Great Pyramid.
Mm-hmm. And so when we say we enter Taurus and that civilization starts flourishing, can you, as an astrologer and astronomer, recognize the specific energetic fingerprints of that particular energy? Can you recognize that in the civilizations?
Yes. Well, when we think of Taurus, we think of the bull, and the bull has a massive body, but it also has the horns which reach up and actually are like antenna for the influences coming down from the starry heavens. That's exactly what we have if we think of the pyramids of Egypt, the ziggurats of Babylon. These are monumental structures which are on the one hand connected with the earth and on the other hand reaching up to the stars. And various other ways as well we can see development. So in particular with the Egyptians, the Babylonians, we have much more the development of the feeling life. And then when the vernal point entered Aries, we see the arising of the Greek and the Roman civilizations, the development of the thought life. We think of Greek philosophy, This was completely new development, which wasn't existing before in the Egyptian.
So the very mental aspect, like thinking and logic thinking, all that stuff.
Yes, the birth of logic. We think of Plato, Aristotle, and this, of course, was a very necessary development. The development of our thinking ability, which enables us to come to understand and develop science, for example, and all the things that our modern civilization have developed have come about through the development of our mental faculties. So we see how each culture develops something new.
And so we're still in that mental age now.
Well, what is new about our Age of Pisces is what we could call the development of exact scientific observation and measurement, which was hardly developed in the Greek or the Roman cultures. We can see, for example, there began the voyages of exploration to discover the whole earth. The Greeks and the Romans didn't have that ability, and then we think of all the things that we have developed in this Age of Pisces, this age of modern science, through coming to understand the scientific structure of the earth, all the different units of, the chemical tables, the astronomical structure of the universe, and we have a completely new awareness which the Greeks and the Romans didn't have.
And so where are we going in the future? What is the next evolution?
The next step is to develop into spiritual consciousness. So if we go back...
About time, I would say.
Yes. This is exactly right. That this is really the very important next step. And so we have to begin to understand that we have a spiritual relationship with the cosmos. Mm-hmm. And that is what my life's work is really about. Mm-hmm. And so I would just mention this book, Astrogeographia, written together with a friend who's a mathematician, David Bowden. It's called Correspondences Between the Stars and Earthly Locations. And the starting point for this research was looking at the Great Pyramid. So in the year 2006, I led a group to Egypt. And while preparing for this in the year 2005, I came to realize that the Great Pyramid has incorporated into it an imprint which relates it to a particular star, which is the star Alnitak, which is in the belt, one of the three stars in the belt of Orion. So when we look up at the constellation of Orion and we see the three stars marking the belt of Orion, then those three stars point to the brightest star, which is the star Sirius. Now the star of the three stars in the belt of Orion that is closest to Sirius is the star Alnitak. And the interesting thing is that at the time the Great Pyramid was built, we speak of the pharaoh Cheops, Khufu, as the Egyptians would say, the builder of this temple, who lived about 2,500 years before Christ. And you can calculate back and see that so there is in the Great Pyramid what are referred to as air shafts, and these are actually star shafts. They're pointing to different stars. And in the King's Chamber of the Great Pyramid, there is a shaft which angles up at an angle of 45 degrees, and you can see that at the time when the pyramid was being built, that shaft was pointing to the star Alnitak at its midnight culmination, when it reaches its highest trajectory, each night. Mm-hmm. So, for whatever reason, the Egyptians built the Great Pyramid to have this orientation to the star Alnitak. And then I would like to refer to a book called The Orion Mystery by Robert Bauval and Adrian Gilbert. Robert Bauval noticed that the architectural layout of the three pyramids at Giza, the Great Pyramid and the other two pyramids, mirrors the three stars in the belt of Orion. Mm-hmm. So this...
Even in size, and it's really amazing.
Right. Yeah. Now so then this was the starting point for this exploration, what I call this science of astrogeographia. Now, if you look up at the stars in the belt of Orion, they're each about 1 degree apart. And if you project a degree from the starry heavens onto the Earth, that is a distance of 111 kilometers, or 69 miles. Okay. Yeah, so it's obviously impossible that the three pyramids at Giza, because they're fairly close together, they're not that distance apart. So what I discovered is that with the Great Pyramid, which was the first of the three pyramids to be built, this is an actual correspondence with the star Alnitak. And with the other two pyramids, it is a symbolic correspondence.
Oh, yeah.
So that if you take the middle star of the belt of Orion, that is the star Al-Nilam, which is, by the way, the most powerful first magnitude star that we can see with the naked eye in terms of its intrinsic luminosity. It's many thousands of times more powerful than our sun. That star Al-Nilam has a correspondence, when you take the projection on the Earth, with the city of Alexandria. Now, just as with the Great Pyramid, we have one of the seven wonders of the ancient world. So with the city of Alexandria, there was located there the Pharos lighthouse, which is one of the seven wonders of the ancient world. And lighthouse has this quality of emitting light. And we think also of the great library of Alexandria, which was a repository of the ancient wisdom, what they called the gnosis, the divine knowing from ancient times, was there in the library of Alexandria, which unfortunately was then later destroyed, so that we don't have the access to this incredible repository of the ancient wisdom that was located there. But so we can speak of the gnosis of Alexandria, and that is the quality emitted by the star Al-Nilam, the middle star of the three, whereas Al-Nitak has to do with these mysteries of death and resurrection, which was what the Egyptian priests were concerned with in their initiation rituals in the king's chamber, for example, where there's a sarcophagus. I can't go into detail now about these initiation rituals, but
definitely they were obsessed about death and life and resurrection. Yeah.
The belief that through Osiris the soul could be reborn, resurrected, and that was the goal in those mysteries located there at Heliopolis, where the Great Pyramid was an initiation temple, actually, not the burial chamber of the pharaoh Cheops. So, and then I discovered that a third one of the great 7 wonders of the ancient world, the Temple of Ephesus. Ephesus in what is now Turkey, but what was for centuries part of the Greek Empire, Ephesus, which was this great temple that was dedicated to Artemis of Ephesus, the goddess Artemis of Ephesus. And that mirrors another star from the constellation of Orion, the star Bellatrix, which is also known as the Amazon star. Now, the incredible thing is that, according to mythology, the first structure that led later, at the time of the Greeks, to this great temple of Artemis, one of the most beautiful temples ever created, unfortunately it was destroyed by fire, it's said, on the night of the birth of Alexander the Great, that this original structure was a wooden structure, and that it was built by the tribe of Amazon women who came from central Turkey there, and they worshipped the goddess they called Upis and built a temple to their goddess there. So now this is the interesting thing, is nobody can explain why is the star Bellatrix called the Amazon star. Here you have an exact, as above, so below. So that this star Bellatrix, or the Amazon star, marking the left shoulder of Orion, has to do with the impulse for which the Temple of Ephesus was created, which is dedicated to the divine feminine, to the great mother goddess.
So when the stars are having this influence, apparently, so it's like civilizations come and go because of the stars, and we are having certain tendencies and moving in specific directions.
Yes, well, we can see then that individual stars radiate their influence upon specific locations. And so I give you another example. When the great Temple of Solomon was being built, Solomon lived shortly after 1,000 years before Christ, and this great temple was said to be one of the most extraordinary creations, incorporating all the mysteries of humanity's evolution at that time. Solomon, of course, was thought of as being the wisest human being of his time. And at that time, the star Betelgeuse, which marks the right shoulder of Orion, was directly overhead. So that great temple of Solomon has to do with the star Betelgeuse.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
You see, so when I was making this discovery, I realized this is incredible, and then I began to look and expand upon this. So, for example, if we consider the mythology connected with Europe. In Greek mythology, it is connected with the daughter, the princess, whose name was Europa, from which we have Europe. Mm-hmm. And she was one day. She was a Phoenician princess, and she was on the beach, and in the Greek mythology, Zeus was very interested in her and disguised himself as a great white bull, came up out of the water onto the beach, and Europa the princess was so fascinated with this magnificent white bull. And she actually then was tempted and climbed on the back of the bull, who immediately plunged into the water and took her off to the island of Crete. And so in Greek mythology, Europe is connected with the bull, you see.
Interesting.
And
so I guess the Europe kind of originated on the island of Crete. You could say that?
Yes, this was the seed of the birth of Europe. Now, for centuries, the center of Europe under the Habsburgs was considered to be Vienna. And so the central star in the constellation of the bull of Taurus is the star Aldebaran, the bull's eye. It's right in the middle. It's at 15 degrees of Taurus. And this is one of the most important stars for the Babylonian definition of the zodiac. Mm-hmm. So the mirroring of that star on the earth is at Vienna. So you see, so Vienna was regarded as the center of Europe, and it actually coincides with the central star in the constellation of Taurus.
Okay, so we got the bullseye in Vienna.
Exactly. Now let me just expound on this a little. So then, when we consider the influence, we've been thinking of the influence, so Betelgeuse connected with the Temple of Solomon, Bellatrix with the Temple of Artemis, Alnitak with the Great Pyramid at Heliopolis, Giza, and Al-Nilam with the city of Alexandria, the Pharos Lighthouse, the Library of Alexandria. And now the star Aldebaran in the middle of Taurus connected with Vienna. And what do we see? We see then the birth in Vienna of this incredible culture. European culture is well known for classical music, for example, and you have the great composers Haydn, Mozart, Beethoven, but also the birth of the waltz and this amazing city of culture, which it still is. Mm-hmm. And so we see that Aldebaran is a star that promotes culture. Now, so this is a very important point to understand in terms of astrology. So each star in a constellation has its own individual emanation. Mm-hmm. I give another example. So when we look at the horns of the bull, we have the brightest star of the two stars marking the tips of the horns of the bull. There is the star El-Nath and the star Al-Heka. And El-Nath is the second brightest star after Aldebaran in the constellation of Taurus. And the mirroring, the projection, according to Astrogeographia, of the star El-Nath upon the earth coincides with St. Petersburg in Russia. And this also is a city of an incredible culture, which forms a bridge actually between the Slavic world with the European world. And that was the idea of Peter the Great when he founded St. Petersburg in the year 1703, and in this rather difficult location, but he was drawn there, you see. And so in this way we can come to see how individual stars have their emanation and actually sow seeds upon the earth. I'll take another example, and that is in England we have the town of Glastonbury, which is famous as a New Age centre. But it is also famous from antiquity, supposedly as the town to which Joseph of Arimathea came. Joseph of Arimathea was the disciple of Christ who was the owner of the cenaculum where the Last Supper of Christ took place, and Joseph of Arimathea actually then took the chalice in which the wine was consumed at the Last Supper, and then it is said that he went the following day to the cross on Golgotha, and that he collected some of the blood of Christ coming down from the cross in this chalice, which we know as the Holy Grail. And it's said that he took the Holy Grail to Glastonbury. There are various legends connected with this. And we find at the present time this flourishing New Age culture there at Glastonbury. And that actually is mirroring in Astrogeographia the star Botine in the constellation of Aries. Now, Aries, you see, the United Kingdom comes under Aries. And so is different actually from the continent of Europe, which comes under Taurus.
Oh, interesting.
See, so this is the background for Brexit,
Okay. Now things start making sense politically these days.
And similarly in Spain, Catalonia belongs to Taurus, but the rest of Spain belongs actually to Aries.
Oh, really? Okay.
So you can understand why the Catalonians feel themselves to be different, want to separate off. Yeah. Anyway, without making it too complicated, so this star Botine is the fourth brightest star in the sign of Aries. And the three brightest stars mark the horns of the ram. These are Hamel, Sheratan, and Mazatim. But if we take the projection of those three stars, it is in the Atlantic Ocean. So representing Aries is the fourth brightest star, Botine, and that is what people are attracted to in relation to this New Age movement in Glastonbury in England. So there are many other interesting things, but maybe just now to point to something rather remarkable, and that is if we look at I mentioned already Atlantis and the destruction of Atlantis. So Atlantis was this great continent in the region of the Atlantic Ocean, and there was running through the middle of Atlantis a ridge of mountains. And then if we follow this through the Atlantic Ocean, we find that that 0 degrees Aries actually coincides with this ridge that ran through the middle of of Atlantis.
Mm-hmm. And you can still see that ridge in the Atlantic Ocean, right?
Yes, there are the
Underwater mountains, basically.
Right, and some of the islands left, because this is also a fundamental question. How is it possible? Because when we look up at the starry heavens at night, we see the stars are rotating. How can it possibly be that there is a correspondence, that there is a one-to-one correspondence between the entirety of the starry heavens and the earthly globe? Mm-hmm. And the answer is that there was, at a certain point in time, an imprint from the starry heavens into the earthly globe. And that is, as it were, a kind of archetype. And it's the same actually.
Like one moment where the whole thing got imprinted?
Yeah.
And so what moment was that, and how did that happen?
Well, I see that as the moment what is described in the Bible, to take that as a point of reference, as the time of the fall. The fall is nothing other than the moment in time when human beings began to incarnate upon planet Earth.
Okay, so the fall was when we came?
The fall, yes. So the fall was, in a sense, like the birth of Earth evolution, the beginning of human evolution upon the Earth, and that took place during the Lemurian period of time. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So that was the...
so there was a snapshot happening at that time.
Yes.
Because the human consciousness incarnated in, that imprint gets established, and that's the blueprint.
Right. And the same thing happens at each person's birth. Mm-hmm. That when a person is...
So on a collective level it happens as a collective consciousness, and then it's also happening as an individual consciousness.
Yes, so when a person is born, there is an imprint of the entirety of the starry heavens into the person's brain. So each person has literally their sidereal horoscope imprinted into their brain. Mm-hmm. And
what about the heart? Where's the heart coming in with that?
Well, I'm just talking about the entirety of the starry heavens now. Now, when we talk about the heart corresponds to the sun.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Is an organ, is the central organ, just as the sun is the center of our solar system. Mm-hmm. And so that is related to a planet. And similarly, the lungs are related to Mercury, the kidneys to Venus.
Really interesting.
And so on. So we have the...
Oh, wow, that's wild.
Internal organs are connected with our planetary system.
Oh, so that's also why when you get incarnated in and you take on a body and you get this imprint, and then later in life you have, certain weaknesses and certain strengths. So some people will have more heart disease and others will have more whatever, stuff like that going on.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, interesting. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, astronomy is really the foundation, and then astrology is the means to be able to understand how we are connected with the cosmos around us. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that has been my field of exploration. Mm-hmm. Now, this was all understood in a kind of, we could say, a sort of dreamlike way by the ancient Egyptians and Babylonians, and then this knowledge became lost. But we can see, again, if I take the account in the Bible, this is one of the things that really got me going with this research in the first place, what is called the Star of the Magi, or the Star of Bethlehem. I had the question, what was that? What was it that the three wise men saw in the heavens that led them to the birth of Jesus. And so one of my books is about the star of the Magi. And what I came to is that there was a specific starry configuration having to do with the planets Jupiter and Saturn and Mars. In fact, my research confirms the research of the German astronomer Johannes Kepler, who we know of as the discoverer of the laws of planetary movement, the three laws defining the movements of the planets around the sun. And he had the idea that that the birth of Jesus took place when there was this conjunction of, or very close proximity to one another, of Jupiter and Saturn and Mars, which he dated to the month of March in the year 6 BC. And I was able to confirm that and actually find the precise date, which was the evening of March the 5th in the year 6 BC. So, in other words, my work confirmed what Kepler had intuited. He had intuited that from seeing a conjunction of Saturn, Jupiter and Mars in the heavens at the same time as a new star appeared in the constellation of Ophiuchus. And through that inspiration then he undertook this research and came to this conclusion, but he wasn't able to find the exact date. So using a particular method I was able to find the exact date. And what I came to then is that the three magi were perhaps the last representatives of the ancient star wisdom, and that they were guided by the stars to be able to actually come to the birth of Jesus. So there's a much larger story to this, but it's too complicated to go into right now, but perhaps that could be another time. I can go into this mystery of the star of the Magi. So in order to round this off now, we began looking at the precession of the equinoxes and the arising of these different civilizations.
Yeah.
And so what we find is that in terms of the unfolding of these zodiacal ages, that each age produces the flourishing of a culture at a particular geographical location. So we go back to the age of Cancer for the ancient Indian culture, the ancient Hindu culture, and interestingly, we find that region of the globe comes under the constellation of Cancer. And then we move further westward, we come then to ancient Persia. I mentioned Zarathustra as the great teacher of that ancient civilization which flourished in the Age of Gemini. And this was a period of having this consciousness of polarity. When we think of Gemini, the twins, we have the heavenly twin and the earthly twin. So Zarathustra himself taught about our connection with the sun on the one hand and with the earth on the other hand. So this polarity of heaven and earth. And then we come into further movement to the west, the civilization of Egypt, and this connection with the constellation of Taurus being mirrored. We think of Orion, and there's much more I could say about this. Obviously, it's a very complex theme, but here we have the beginning in the Age of Taurus of the development of our sentient life, our feeling life in a much more refined way. And then coming into the Age of Aries, Aries is connected with the head, and we have here the development of our thinking ability.
Mm-hmm. Do you see any, so since now you have this capacity of reading the map of the earth, kind of, can you look into the future and see where the next great civilization is going to come?
Yes. So just to hold that we have in the Age of Aries the birth of the Greek and Roman cultures and the development of philosophy, thinking, and so on. And we think of Aries, the force of the head. Now, then we have this tremendous transition to Pisces. The feet are connected with Pisces, and that is then when this exploration of the earth began. What we have now, we have really, our modern civilization has explored practically every square mile, every square kilometre of planet Earth. So this is the Piscean drive to know the Earth in her fullness and complexity. But unfortunately, also the tendency, through the development of business, the business world, and the profit principle of actually plundering the resources of the earth. This is a tragedy for Mother Earth, and that is why we need this awakening now to the spiritual dimension. And it is above all the Slavic peoples, Russia and the other Slavic countries, that are holding this potential for this returning to the spiritual dimension and coming into a sense of community. Now, there'll be much more to say about this. What took place in the 20th century through the Bolshevik Revolution was a travesty, was a robbing of this development. Communism was a kind of false lure for the Slavic people to form community in a premature way, because this will really come in the Age of Aquarius. We still have a little way to go for this development. And so we see a tragic misdirection that took place through the development of Soviet communism. But there will be a true flourishing in the future of a great spiritual culture there.
Okay, so we're going to see the new light, kind of what we could call the awakening, the new age will come from the Slavic regions on the planet. Okay.
Right. And then
okay, I'm ready to pack my bags. Let's go.
And then that will be the Age of Aquarius. The Slavic culture will be followed by the Age of Capricorn, which has to do with America, North and South America, where we are now.
So that's even further in the future.
This is even further in the future.
Oh wow!
And this will be the unfolding of the mysteries of how to connect with the life forces, but in a positive way, not to misuse them.
Life forces?
The life forces of Mother Nature.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. That was a capacity which existed on ancient Atlantis, but unfortunately through the misuse of that capacity, that's what brought about the destruction of Atlantis, when those forces began to be used in an egotistical way.
So it sounds to me that despite the grim outlook of the situation on the planet right now, that the stars are giving us hope.
Yes,
like
exactly.
the stars are telling a different story. It's saying, there is a future where people are conscious and understand the interconnectedness with everybody, and so it's not the end.
Exactly. No, there is definitely a future for humanity. We are going through some very difficult and challenging times right now, as you know, through this unbelievable egotistical drive, the drive for power, control, and so on and so forth, that we see at the present time. But humanity can develop completely new spiritual faculties, and this is the great promise of the future. It will be an awakening on a mass scale.
And I would say, I'm doing lots of research in all kinds of directions, and I'm seeing a lot of very interesting science coming out of Russia, and it seems to me that they are a great deal more switched on than the American scientists. They're really they're including consciousness in their research. They're including nature, and they're not afraid of, stepping out over the edge and go into some deeper mysteries that science normally in the West is not willing to look at. So I see a lot of great stuff coming out of Russia these days. And so, yeah. Well, that's awesome. So there is a future for humanity, and it's not all over yet. We just need to grow up. I think that's a beautiful message that you're bringing here at the end. So thank you so much for the ride, and I hope we're going to do some more.
Of course. Well, thank you so much, Joshua, for inviting me, and I'd like to express my appreciation also to your colleague Boris for his wonderful work, and I'm happy to continue. This is just one little conversation.
Yeah.
Time, yes.
Yeah. You are a fountain of knowledge and wisdom, and I'm looking so much forward to tap into it even more in the future.
Good. Well, thank you, Joshua.
Thank you.